Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Talking Conservation. This time, Stephen and I are lucky enough to go to meet the two directors of the National Retrofit Hub, Rachel Owens and Sara Edmonds. We talked to them about what the National Retrofit Hub is, a bit about Rachel and Sara's background initially, and then we go on to understand who's involved and what the National Retrofit Hub is doing. We look at the reasons for and benefits of retrofit, and then some of the specifics about what the retrofit is outputting at the moment, such as EPC reform, home buying and selling support, and digital logbooks. And then we go on to talk about some of the longer term aims and aspirations of what the Retrofit Hub is supporting. We think it's a great episode and very applicable to our traditional old buildings, and we hope you enjoy it too. Right, hello everyone, and welcome to the next episode. We're here at the Cullinan studio in just outside Angel in London with the two directors of the National Retrofit Hub. So warm welcome to Rachel and Sara. And the idea of what we're going to be chatting through today is just to get a bit of an understanding about your personal backgrounds, your input into the National Retrofit Hub, and actually what it's all about in terms of what would be useful for our audience.
Sounds great.
So, Rachel, would you like to sort of start in terms of, what we're interested in really is, first of all, the National Retrofit Hub. So what is its purpose, what's it for, and why is it needed, I suppose?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Retrofit Hub was launched in March last year by our board. Sara and I came on board in July last year, so we've been in post for just over a year now. And what the Hub's really there to do is to bring together everyone that's working in the retrofit sector to collectively co-create solutions to some of the known barriers that we face in enabling the local delivery of retrofit at scale. And what that really looks like is making sure that we can bring as many different stakeholders into the room as possible to really share how they're starting to tackle different challenges, to draw in their knowledge, to make it more than the sum of its parts, and to produce outputs that are useful for the whole industry to help support them make change. That's a little bit about what we do, but we also have other strands that are more sort of wide-reaching and thinking about informing strategy and sort of trying to understand how we might to help produce some of the solutions to the policy vacuum that we're facing in the industry.
Just to pick up on your individual backgrounds, because you're both architects,
That's right.
I believe, in different practices. So can you just tell us a bit about your backgrounds and how you came to even apply to be directors of the Retro Hub?
Do you want to start?
I am an architect. I don't architect anymore. I don't have time. But as well as being co-director with Rachel at the National Retrofit Hub, I'm head of citizen engagement at Built Environment Smarter Transformation, which is the innovation centre for the built environment in Scotland. And I also co-founded a community benefit society in Hackney, where I live, called Home Energy Action Lab, and that is really a organisation that advocates for low carbon retrofit in the community, for the community, ultimately by the community. So things are a little busy to still also have sustained my architecture practice, which was Studio Search. Although we do still have a bit of consultancy running out of that in terms of the retrofit world as well. So fairly obsessed with retrofit, I'd say. So my role within BEST in Scotland is also within the retrofit team. So yeah, and then I guess how we came to apply for the job was when the job became visible, I did look at it and think, yeah, no, I'm not going to take that on. I will not going to do that. And Rachel got in touch with me and said, see, though, I think maybe this is for us. And I thought, okay, as an us, yes, okay, as a pair, we'll take that on.
So you knew each other professionally?
Yeah. Yes, I guess the thing that connected us was that we were both coordinators with the Architects Climate Action Network for a long time. So we knew each other really well from that, and it was really Rachel saying, should we go in this together? And we ultimately made them an offer saying, this is what.
So it was just one job?
Yeah, there was a small line at the bottom that said we will accept flexible ways of working and job shares will be considered. And I think I saw that and went, haha.
Yeah, because you're also still practicing as well.
Yeah, so I do still practice in architecture. So I've always worked with existing buildings. I've started off my career in a small practice called Snell David, who did residential refurbishments, extensions. There was an amount of retrofit involved in that work, and really enjoyed working directly with people who were living in their homes. And then I went on to another practice and started working more in the commercial space, but also very much with existing buildings. And then I moved across to Buckley Grey Yeoman, where I'm still working mostly on existing buildings there as well. So they do a lot of refurbishments, extensions, adaptive reuse of commercial buildings, but they also do quite a lot of new build residential and schools. And yeah, joined the Architects Climate Action Network because I've always been really interested in climate change. And I was part of the Embodied Carbon group. We wrote a paper on how to regulate embodied carbon, met Sara, started becoming more interested, and then became head of sustainability at my practice. And yeah, saw the role come up, and I just thought, I really love being head of sustainability at my practice, but I also was really searching for having a bit more of a wider strategic impact, going a bit further. And I've always thought that Sara was amazing, so I thought, well, let's see if I can convince her to put in an application. So we put in a joint application, and basically said to the board, this is what you're going to get if you get us. What do you think? And they said, yeah, we think it sounds like a good fit.
Well, they said nothing for a while. And then we thought, oh, well, it was worth a shot. And then they came back and they were like, yeah, we just struggled to actually find the time to come together as a board. But yes, we would love to have you.
And my practice has been incredibly supportive. So I went down to 2 days a week there and brought on some additional help in a sustainability specialist. And then I do 3 days a week and Sara does 2 at the hub.
Yeah, and I suppose I'd also always worked with existing buildings, and when I left big practice architecture so that I could, there's a whole other conversation that maybe we don't have time to get into today about potentially how difficult it is to be an architect in big practice architecture, but whilst also trying to have a sensible life-work balance. So I set up my own practice in order to enable that. But I was becoming really, really frustrated about how much waste really there was in the construction industry and in architecture. You know, the kind of slash and burn, you kind of knock the back off a house and then you plug on this like new extension, and everything that you just chucked away has gone into a skip somewhere, and what sense is this making? And when I realised that 20% of total UK emissions just go into heating our homes, I thought, hang on a minute, this is bananas, what are we going to do about this? And in joining the Architects Climate Action Network, that enabled us to take collective action, where working as a sole practitioner, you felt really alone and unable to have any impact, and you felt sort of just swept up in the wave of something that was quite a damaging process. So being able to find like-minded people willing to take collective action enabled me to sort of really question my practice as an architect and whether or not I was really being able to make any change. And it was at a conference hosted by BEST, Construction Scotland Innovation Centre, as was, where I got really frustrated with what I was hearing from people who were there from the industry, who were like, but how are we really going to make this change? And I knew what all these volunteers were doing, the likes of ACAN, Letty, all these organisations who were fundamentally so driven to address the issues of climate in the built environment, and the industry was benefiting off all of this free labour ultimately. So I kind of had a rant about everybody saying, well, you know what you could do? You could start paying people for this effort and this labour that they're doing to wholesale help change the industry. And it was kind of off the back of that I got the job offers to work with BEST and others. So I think a realisation and then finding people that you can support you, like a network like ACAN, is something that can be really transformational. And I think that's what we've taken into our practice in the National Retrofit Hub. We always say the National Retrofit Hub, it isn't me and Rachel. It's me and Rachel and thousands of people across the industry collaborating, coming together, seeking to address our kind of shared mission to enable the local delivery of retrofit at scale.
And it's a really supportive part of the industry to work in. I mean, transitioning from sort of traditional architecture into more of the sustainability side, you meet all of these people who are so open, so willing to share their knowledge, so ready to work together. And ACAN had these great principles that were developed by their founders, talking about, you know, facilitation and active listening and making sure that everyone in the room gets a voice. And I think it's those practices that we're trying to bring into the hub in all of the meetings, where we're really making sure that everyone has a space to share what they think, because we've talked about this before, the retrofit industry is full of incredibly passionate people who have really strong views, and you want to capture that, but you want to be able to do it in a way that means that they can all talk to one another. So I think those skills that we developed in ACAN have been super useful to try and navigate some really complex subjects that you
So it's often more the soft skills, and it's the sort of the collaboration side of things, as
It's
opposed to
so
it's taking all the
much-
very, very deeply technical expertise that individuals have got, sort of saying, great, how can we utilise that for best effect?
Yeah, I also do feel like in the last year my brain has physically grown by being able to just speak to so many really, really intelligent people who know so much and try and process all of their unique perspectives, and having meetings with Dr. Hassan Khan and talking about data, and then in another moment talking to Pippa Palmer about social value. And it's been a real mental journey as well to try and sort of bring all that in.
Yeah, you just put the total fear in me there to start saying, oh my goodness, if we start mentioning all
No,
the
I shouldn't
people.
mention any more people. Yeah.
Because there are so many people that I think are, and I think that's as well what drives this is it's not necessarily, of course it's the what we're trying to do, but it's absolutely the how we're trying to do it that matters. And I think it won't be surprising for anybody listening to hear, or maybe it will, but I think it's fairly well evidenced that delivering retrofit isn't necessarily a technical problem. We have got technical solutions, and we do have the methodologies and the materials and the understanding of how to apply those. It's the relational one. It's how we work together. It's how we collaborate together. It's how we fundamentally shift the approach of the construction industry from one that was predicated on competition towards one that is fundamentally predicated on collaboration. And you have to do that because frankly, we got some serious existential crises heading our way, or that we're in the midst of right now. We have got to start changing the way in which we interact with each other.
But how are you going to get the message across? I mean, I'm thinking for the homeowner and for the ordinary professional, the one who's just going out day to day, just doing their job. How are you going to get the message across? Because at the moment there are quite a few mixed messages. We've got one profession saying one thing, we've got another saying something similar but not quite the same, and then we've got government saying something else, and then we've got big industry or companies coming in wanting to sell their wonder product to solve all our problems. How do you see yourselves bringing those things together and trying to sort out, frankly, the mess that we're in?
So we recognise that it's a huge challenge, and I think what we're also recognising is that the how we're going to do it is the way that we've been kind of approaching everything that we do. Number one, you've got to get everyone in the room. You've got to get everyone in the room, and you've got to allow them to say what it is that they're trying to do, whilst also supporting them in understanding the other perspectives in the room as well. So that's a sort of a big, broad, high-level statement, but in practical terms, one of the issues, I think, is the fact that when you say that government are saying one thing, I would argue that, unfortunately, government haven't necessarily been saying enough in terms of clarity. I think we can be hopeful about what might be coming imminently, but our role there as well is to build relationships in order to ensure that the consensus that we're hoping to be facilitating across the retrofit industry is seen as a positive thing from policymakers so that we can gain clarity. Now, practically, we are in the process of building a communications toolkit. Toolkit is sort of a buzzword at the moment that maybe we don't want to focus too much on, but it's a way of pulling together this particular work strand. And the way we've done that is to say to everybody, and the first kickoff meeting was only yesterday, where we had 52 at some point, where what we said was to our network, we want to do this thing, we want to be able to pull together what we understand, and our first step is always to scan the horizon, to do a literature review, to understand what's already out there so we don't duplicate efforts, pull it together and make some sense of it in collaboration with a group of people. Now, 50 very keen people from a broad range of, from individual small commercial entities right the way up to Trustmark. Everybody was in that room. So what we do is we bring them together and say, okay, then this is the state of the situation of this particular topic. What is the leverage points within this that will allow us to continue to build that consensus so that clear messaging can go to all of the professional bodies, and that ultimately that filters down to the public and how out that goes. Now, our audience currently is not direct to the public. Our channel of communication is through the bodies, through the strategic relationships, and trying to pull them together to build that consensus. And I think what we have to do as an industry is agree on top-level messaging around what quality retrofit looks like. And for us, that's based on outcome.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for trust that people aren't hearing different messages from different people about why we're doing this. And then at the same time, it's also not simple, because the reason why one person might choose to retrofit over another person, over another body, might be quite different outcomes focuses. So giving space to sort of really talk about the myriad benefits of retrofit, from, you know, reducing carbon emissions, improving energy security, tackling fuel poverty, health and well-being outcomes, jobs, allowing that sort of broad strand of messaging to exist, but maybe giving people really clear, well, A, agreeing on the statistics that we're going to use, and B, agreeing on the messaging, so that there's maybe different branding and different ways that this messaging is coming across, but it's producing this cohesive voice, and that's what we really want to try and enable. And I think there's a real calling for it from the industry as well. There's lots of organisations who work in this space who are having to pull together these messages themselves and wondering if they're saying quite the right thing. So giving them the comfort that they're saying a thing that can be trusted and is true, I think is another part of it.
One of the other issues I find is that a large proportion of the public, homeowners, building owners, don't use professionals at all. And so therefore they get the message that there's heat loss, they want to save energy, etc. The best thing to do is to insulate their homes. They don't bother seeking professional advice. They just go to someone that is offering a so-called solution. How can you get your message, or how do you think in future, because it's all very well getting to the professions, you've got a body there that's already partly listening.
Yeah.
But how about the public? How
I think
do you get through
there's
to
two
the
sort of strands here, isn't there?
I feel like you're just speaking what's in my brain.
Let's see. This is going to be a good test. The other day, Sarah said something, and I just thought, that is exactly what I was going to say. We're just becoming the same person. So the two strands are, one, I think we need to do this at more of a scale. So thinking about how we can start to aggregate more projects together, hopefully being driven by the community, enabling professionals to be engaged, because it's not
Do you mean
a
a community retrofit scale? So in the whole streets hold that sort of side of things?
Yeah, potentially that side of things, potentially identifying different buildings within a local authority, depending on who's leading on the project. But we see that aggregation as a really important way of enabling more skill to be able to be implemented on projects, because then you have more of a capacity to be able to engage with professionals and do things in a way that follows certain rigour and standards. So I think that aggregation part, and we're doing lots of work around how we can enable that, looking at digital building logbooks and archetyping, doing some work with London councils there around that. But then I think there's always going to be the sort of one at a time, one-off projects that are independently procured by homeowners. And we see the SME builders as a really fundamental part of delivering this. And people talk all the time about all of these new people that we need to work in the retrofit space, and that's absolutely true. But also, there's already an existing industry that is delivering a lot of work on people's homes. So we need to leverage the trigger points when they are brought in to a job, and it's a kitchen replacement, it's an extension. Enabling those people to be able to say, well, actually, wouldn't it be great if everyone had a retrofit plan, and they could say, well, your retrofit plan says that these are the steps that you could take next, what about if we include it? But also just giving them the sort of confidence to engage in that work. So we see the builders merchants is playing a really important role in this space, because they're a really key touch point for those smaller builders, but also just generally about the sort of way that people that work in the construction sector learn. We've been thinking about the role for more education around how a building works as a system and building physics. So I don't know if you want to...
Yeah, so...
The training delta, of which there is quite a vast one.
It is. I think probably one of the two you said were the two I was thinking of.
There
are three. So for me, I think that bit about those that maybe aren't aware, I would say it's not that people don't bother to seek professional services. I think sometimes that can feel like a barrier, because maybe that also equates to cost that maybe people don't know, and also an awareness of like, who can help me. So there are, I think, two things: the SME builders, and I guess what we mean there is it's all the acronyms, the RMI, so the repair, maintenance and improvement sector. I think it's in the region, like, you know, somebody no doubt will email you to correct me, but something in the region of £30 billion, right? So it's huge, and it's largely unregulated. But that is where people go, I need to replace the shower. That's where I'll go. I'm a trusted trader, whoever that is, or my neighbour's recommendation of somebody. So this is where the builders merchants are really crucial, because when you go in to buy your shower, the question is, can the builders merchant say, have you got wastewater heat recovery with that? And if not, do you know where to get training for it? And how do we then leverage other like organisations like the NHIC, the National Home Improvement Council, who have got these amazing like resources? Like, how do we bring those things together so that it's like a connected infrastructure of support at the different trigger points, right? So we do think that the builders, merchants, the SMEs, the installers, the people who are existing within the construction industry, we have to centre them. We don't have to push them out and terrify the wits out of them that they need to wholesale retrain and there's no job for you, and maybe a job that's been predicated on carbon heavy intensive work like boilers and things like that. You don't just say stop, you say transition. And how do we do that? We have to be supportive of that, and we have to also recognise the wisdom and the skills that they have instead of demoralising them and terrifying them.
And incentivising them, I suppose, in terms of sort of saying this is an upsell, this is additional string to your bow that you can have to increase your profits and increase your business.
And recognise what the way of communication is for that is often interpersonal trust. So it's the conversations from builder to builder to builder or neighbour to neighbour. That's important, which sort of leads me to the second point that I was going to say. A crucial element of increasing knowledge and capacity and demand, if you're going to call it that, is through community. And this is something that I think we could talk a little bit about. We are seeing a grassroots rising of groups who are organising because there is an urgent need to improve their lived conditions on their street, in their community, via their community building, through their school, through their sports club, through their faith organisation. And they are coming together and saying, we can do stuff, we know each other, we can work together, we can do stuff. What should we do? Help us. There is a huge movement there, and I would point any of your listeners to watch the Retrofit Reimagined film, which we can give you the links to and you can share. But that really well summarises the nature of this sort of emergence of real capacity and opportunity to build the trust that you talked about, but also the awareness and the knowledge of how to do things. We have to support communities in place by recognising that this is where kind of trust builds, and also if we want to see retrofit at scale delivered, then it needs to be something that people understand and are willing to receive. And currently retrofit is not sold in a way that people want it. It's not that people don't want the benefits of retrofit, they just don't want the way it's being offered. So the way in which you help change that is by enabling communities, and ennobling is a quite interesting way of describing it. I think communities have been infantilized for too long. I think we know that top-down projects that are delivered and done to communities don't stick as well, don't work as well than those that are done with actual, real, honest, true, built, like kind of involvement, co-design. And I'm not saying that we hand external wall insulation to the kids in the playground with a bunch of blue tack and say, let's go, let's retrofit. But there are nuanced skill sets, local wisdoms and knowledges, the ability to build trust, that really nobody is better placed than people who represent that community. So how are we going to ensure that if we want to see retrofit at scale, and I think this is what we're now beginning to look at, is we talk about enabling the local delivery of retrofit at scale. And I think we need to really define the terms of what we mean by local and what we mean by scale. And I think often lots of people think that delivering retrofit at scale means mass industrialization of top-down, rubber-stamped retrofit. And whilst there will be conditions where that's appropriate, that's not, I think, what really it means. It means lots of replication of good models that can be understood locally.
And it's probably worth saying as well that there are already great pockets of this sort of work being done and developed in place. Like, we have so many connections with community groups who are already doing this work on the ground, and I think we see our role as very much supporting them to keep doing what they're doing, learning from them and understanding how have they made it work in their scenario, and then supporting other groups that are coming up and enabling them to learn from what's being done by others. So being able to sort of keep spreading the work that's already happening in places like Manchester and Birmingham and Bristol all across the country, and make it a blanket sort of.
Yeah.
Hi folks, sorry to interrupt, but really importantly, to help support this channel and to continue to make the content that we're making here, it's really helpful if you click on subscribe and one of the buttons down here, and also click on the little notification bell, then you won't miss an episode that comes up. Also, giving us a like or thumbs up also helps indicate whether or not this is the kind of content you enjoy listening to. Right, I'll leave you to get on with the rest of the video now. Thanks very much.
How are you getting the word out?
We're talking to you, aren't we?
No, I mean, I'm talking about media, because obviously there's social media, and we're part of that, that's why we're here today partly, but there's the media. How are you getting the message out? I mean, professionals is one thing, but to the homeowner, the small builders, how are you going to get your message
I think
out
we
to them?
very much see this as being the reason behind our strategic partners and our sponsors and how we make relationships there. Obviously, we're talking to the industry all the time, and they're fundamentally really important because that's where we're gathering all this information. But we have strategic partners across people like Best Up in Scotland, the BSI. We talk to people within DESNES and DLUC, UK GBC, for example. And then we have...
You're really going for it with the acronyms. I'm sure your listeners will know these things, but yes, but it's true.
Actually,
Such a bad habit, isn't
We can see in the show
we'll go
notes.
through all the
Yep.
acronyms afterwards, and we'll put a
I
table
realised
of them.
I was
Glossary.
doing it myself as well.
gloss.
But all of these are like entities
Yeah.
who are operating within the decarbonising of the built environment, generally.
And then we have, partners and sponsors and collaborators who are talking directly to homeowners. And I think it's about making sure that we understand what their needs are and also feeding back to them. So I think that's our main sort of...
I would also say it's a timing thing as
I
well.
was about
It's
to say,
not
it's a real-
our responsibility right now to be the ones who are going out with a public campaign. It is our responsibility to surface everything that's going on in retrofit and identify, okay, amongst this, what is our role? Because one of the key things is, just because we're the National Retrofit Hub, we're trying to convene the industry and maybe beyond, and recognising that it is a system problem, therefore who we're engaging with needs to diversify, so building our relationships with the health services and so on and so forth. But also is a questioning of what is appropriate for us at this time as in our role, and who else needs to jump in and do their bit as well. And in terms of how that is getting out there, we're also cognizant of the fact that it is an urgent issue. So whatever we can do, talking publicly, whatever we can do, showing up at different events, but also, I suppose, understanding what the touch points are for people. Maybe nobody wants to listen to you and me, but maybe they want to listen to you. So it's understanding who is best placed to send and share these messages. And I would just point to another collaborator of ours, David Nugent from Canopy Housing in Leeds. Sure, they were on TV, on Breakfast TV earlier in the week, doing a great job of that. And what our role there is making sure that we're capturing the learnings from what David and the team in Leeds are doing really well, but also hearing from them about the problems that they have so that we can get under the skin of trying to solve some of those to let them get on and do what they're really good at.
The timing thing is something I wouldn't mind picking up on in terms of, so Natural Retrofit Hub now is sort of just over 12 months old. Leaps and bounds, of course, from where it started, and we've touched a bit on that. In terms of where do you see then, with part of this messaging, I suppose, and getting the message out to the public in terms of both the public but also through the professionals, where do you see the next 12 months and then possibly the next 5 years?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things we talk about quite a lot is that the first 12 to 18 months has really been about people coming into us. So people coming and joining our working groups, sharing their knowledge, engaging in our events, because they're often seeking us out, which has been absolutely amazing. I think the next year is really going to be us looking at how can we reach out more. A lot of that depends on resource, but thinking about how we can support people within the community, because we know that those people are probably the ones that are the least resource rich and have the least amount of time and probably need the most support. So that's a real priority for us. I think as well, we're also very keen to assist with the new government with their strategies and their plans. We have got very good insights from the industry, and we understand what the industry needs to scale up. So we have been having great conversations with people in DESNES, specifically who are looking at skills, but we want to broaden that engagement more and make sure that all of the lessons we're learning from the industry get translated up to that government level. I think also it's really important for us working with local authorities and people like that. We're not supporting them directly, but signposting to where they can get existing support, because we see that as a really key place where some of this work can take place.
I mean, it's always useful to go from these sort of big picture talkings down to actually practical, what does that look like? What have we done there? One of the first questions that we asked about, how would we support local authorities is, well, hang on, who's already supporting local authorities? So we leveraged our network and did a call out and said, If you provide local authority retrofit advisory services, so specifically that initial piece, can you let us know, expecting to get 10 to 12 responses. We got over 50 responses of resources that apparently exist out there for local authorities. So we then leveraged what we have begun, which is our co-creators initiative, where we ask, people who've put themselves forward to say, look, we really want to help, but can't commit to being part of the working groups ongoing, but I have expertise in this space. So we put out to our co-creators group, say, look, we're after receiving all of this information on local retrofit advisory services. We would like to be able to put that into a directory to publish so that we can say to local authorities, did you know all of this is here for you? Because some local authorities are well-resourced, some are not. Generally, all of them are under pressure. And so sometimes it's one officer who's looking after transport, waste, retrofit and whatever. So to be able to go, I've got retrofits on my plate now, where do I go for support? Our directory says you can go to, this one's paid for, this one is not, this is what this one deals with, this is how you can access it, and see if that leads to enough sort of increased support for local authorities. If it doesn't, which arguably it doesn't, we then have the opportunity with our working groups to say, okay, this is what we know. What's the next gap?
How do we plug
it? And is it our responsibility, or is it actually the responsibility of others? I think the only other thing I wanted to say was we've talked, both of you come back to referring to us supporting professionals. I think it is and it isn't that, and it isn't as well communities and grassroots alone. I think we also recognise the great work that's been doing on a sort of if we're talking about delivery models, looking at those who are developing and delivering quality work in the SHDF, so the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which is arguably probably one of the better funded programmes. We know people who are doing really good work in that, both from the contractor side as well as the consultants side, and where we see work that's good and where we're learning from things that have been good. I can think of a number, but I'm really terrified to say more names now in case I'm showing favoritism. We're not. We're agnostic. You're all brilliant. It is showcasing that and saying this is what good looks like, and this is how we can exemplify like what good looks like, and encourage other people to want to do that as well. So it is trying to. I mean, I know it sounds like an awful lot that we're trying to do, and maybe some people think we're trying to do too much. But I just
including both of our partners.
That's true. My kids this weekend are going to be supporting us doing a retrofit workshop, and they're
brilliant. Get them grassroots level. Perfect.
We have. It's quite funny. We did this. We went with Civic Square to this Timberfest. I don't know if you're aware of Timberfest, the festival during the summer. Right. All focused around timber, surprisingly. But we had this opportunity to talk about, what's the basic understanding of retrofit in the home, and because we knew it was going to be in a field, we had to make these big boards with stick-on things, and it was very, very fun, and we had 6 kids trying to help us, my own 2 and friends of others as well, and it became known in the festival as, have you seen the retrofit show?
Oh, right.
Because it got a little bit manic and out of hand, but it was very fun. But they now they love that, because it's not about the subject matter for them, it was the fact that they had an opportunity to be part of this fun festival. And I know that's a very quite simple anecdote about how you can encourage engagement, but if you can relate it, for them now, they just see this as a fun way of communicating and using their artistic creative
that's
skills.
That's the risk, isn't it? I mean, and I've got 2 sort of small children as well, and actually we're almost not ramming down their throats, but there's the fear. There's this sort of general fear of this is catastrophe coming in the future. And actually it's a case of we need to encourage them sort of saying, well, there is a solution to this. Yeah. We have got a way out of this, and we've got to all sort of collaborate and work together, as opposed to just, well, crumbs, what's the point in being on this planet then if it's all going to suddenly cascade on us?
Is that, and actually I think, so if we were to zoom right the way back out again to the ultimate situation here, if we know that we have an ultimate global carbon budget and just operating on that level, that's a number, right? Why would we not as an industry rise to the challenge of that ultimate number instead of picking an arbitrary lower number? And what I mean by that is, we cannot continue to think that it's okay for us to externalize some of the costs of the sourcing of our materials, supply chains globally. We have to really start to grapple with those things, and that's a literacy issue. So we don't want to suddenly start with terrifying people saying, you can't do what you're doing anymore, you've got to stop immediately. It's okay, I see you're doing a good thing, but we have got to start taking responsibility for the broader impacts of our industry, and that has to start with the literacy part, but then enabling the pathways to be great enough to meet that challenge. Why wouldn't we want to be great enough to meet that challenge? Why would you not? So I think that's what we also want to try and do, but we want to do it in an encouraging way. It's a great privilege to be in this role, to be in this space, but it's also a privilege to be able to opt in and out of it. And we can, in this part of the world, opt in and out of being sustainable, in inverted commas. So I think we have to reckon with the fact that that's a privilege that we have, and not overlook it, and step fully into it. Like, there's huge opportunity for huge creativity, great connectivity, a much better future for everybody. Why wouldn't you want to be part of that?
Could I pick up on some science technical side of things?
Yeah.
We like that too.
It's just that, the reason I want to pick up on that side of it is that I deal primarily with older buildings. And for many years now, people have made assumptions about how they perform or don't perform. And many years ago, I'm not going to say who, with or how, but I raised the question of where is the science coming from and why are you making those assumptions? And I in particular with regard to, say, EPCs.
Yeah.
And of course, no one can answer me, and they say, well, we just made that assumption. And when I've spoken to architect colleagues who have actually done the proper calculations of energy performance, quite often those buildings perform far better than has been assumed. And I think when we hear what's being said, often in the media, sometimes out of government ministers' mouths coming out, we've got to do X, Y, Z. And of course the public, and we've already mentioned and discussed how some of the public are just going to rely on local builders, or maybe just go to a supplier. They're not necessarily going to understand how their building actually performs. So they're sitting in a Victorian solid wall house and they think, I know what I've got to do. I've got to shove in double glazing. I've got to put external insulation, or in fact, some of them think I'm going to put internal insulation in. And the next thing we know, they've got mould and problems because they didn't understand the basic science to start with. And that is one of my concerns, that we see a lot that's happened over the last 20 years, for argument's sake. I mean, mould is a big concern at the moment.
Absolutely.
But that arises in a large part because of the drive to insulate buildings without thinking how you're then going to deal with moisture. Where is the science to back what we're going to do in future? Where is the science to understand some of the traditional building materials, so solid wall, lime mortar buildings, even older timber frame watland daub buildings? Yes, there are so many variants that I understand the science, it could get very complicated, but there surely must be a way of getting better information so that we're starting from the right point.
I mean, I think there's some direct answers to that. So there's the Centre for Moisture in Buildings, amazing people. There's CEDA, there is...
Historic England have some great guidance on their website as well.
CEDA being the Scottish Ecological Design Association. Well, I'm sorry if that was the wrong A. So we know that there are sources of the right science, right? We know that is there. I think maybe the bigger question here is, how is that science getting deep and spread across the construction industry as a whole? So I think, again, it's another well-evidenced gap that basic building physics is a big omission across the construction industry. And I can say that as an architect as well, where there were some classes at university where we were talking about, energy modelling and performance of buildings and all the rest of it. It wasn't necessarily the fundamental part of that. So I know it's missing in architecture, but it's missing on sites. It's why we have performance gap. It's why you have poor workship on sites as well. It comes down to trying to ensure that everybody has a basic grasp on the fact that a building is a breathing, sweating, living, moving thing that is affected by how it's occupied and used, and making that much more understandable, and probably not using the word physics at all when we're describing that at certain levels. So entry level point of understanding that that's how buildings operate and work. We're actually doing a piece of work around this to try and work with those that have the right responsibility and the right influence to ensure that there is a better quality of building physics across education, so that it can it can lead to better outcomes. And part of that isn't expecting every construction person, every apprentice, every site manager, every designer, every community leader or whatever to understand the full scope of building physics, but it's to understand how much of it they ought to know and at what point should they raise a red flag. So if you are putting a thing into a building, or if you're a QS and you are under pressure to take out something because it's a costly thing and to swap in something else because it's cheaper, at what point are you going to be enabled and empowered to be able to put up your hand and say, no, that is a risk and that's beyond my pay grade, or that's beyond what I'm comfortable with. I'm not going to allow that to happen, so that you then know who you should ask. So part of it is also the system of people involved in making decisions around buildings to ensure those better outcomes are met. And that's a big, big challenge. It's not an easy one, but it is one that we have to really face. And I think we can agree that with the current context of the Grenfell inquiry coming out as well, that if ever there was a time for us to stand up and be good enough to meet that challenge as an industry, it is now, where it was 20 years ago.
There's a lot of certainly on the educational side of things, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen, but what I'm also interested in is where's potentially the funding for really understanding our traditional building stock and our building stock materials. So in other words, that solid wall there, we know it's at 2.4 watts per metre cubed in terms of heat loss. What about that wall over there, which is actually looks identical, but actually it's completely different in terms of the moisture content of it? A lot of the funding has gone for new materials because it's paid for by manufacturers who are sort of saying this is a new product to the market because they need to make a profit. Do you see a way of sort of saying, actually, how can we leverage some of the funding that's required to go to, whether it's universities or otherwise, to fund what is the existing, what is the data, what is the start point for a lot of these buildings, that we can sort of say, actually, that building doesn't need any internal insulation because of this and this, for example?
Yeah, it's a tricky question. I think the thing is, when you're looking at much larger scale projects, often there is that level of support. So with my other hat on, we'll be working on, buildings that are 200,000 square foot, and you'll have a lot of different consultants on those projects. You'll probably be able to do a lot of testing, and there'll be the capacity there. We'll be doing WAFI calculations, and we're working with consultants who have developed techniques for measuring U values in place, and all of these things are starting to happen much more in those sort of more large scale projects. But there's definitely a gap in some of the other smaller scale projects. I think, as I was mentioning, aggregation might be able to help with that. We know people who are doing good things in, for example, Scotland, looking at the solid walls homes there, where there is modelling happening because it's more understood that is needed. But I think you're right that there is more. It's more necessary for some of these works to be done on older buildings, and at the minute it's not necessarily budgeted for.
I think because they're often classified as hard to treat properties because they present a whole range of kind of complex things that people are a bit afraid of, and so there's a fear element to it. But I think policy has a really, really big role to play here, and I would point to two other international models where this has been addressed. One in France, which maybe was the feature of the podcast that you did with Kay, where they were talking about ensuring that a certain percentage of refurbishments had to use a certain percentage of wood fibre insulation in them. And that automatically increased funding and development in the wood fibre industry because there was a supply chain that was going to emerge. It gave, so policy lever like that
follow the money.
Could change something overnight. Then you look at Ireland. So Ireland has its national retrofitting strategy, national retrofit scheme, I think it's called. But they obviously have multi-annual funding, and they have the policy to back up and the mechanism to deliver through one-stop shops and a couple of other grant pathways, if you like. And they made a conscious decision to start narrow with a contractor-led model of one-stop shop, plus looking at an archetype or a date plus forward of building stock. So from the 70s, 80s, 90s, that kind of thing. So therefore, you're going to get, you're kind of working with what the current contractors know, the cavity wall construction of more modern building. But they're now looking at developing their pre-1940 policy, which would be the equivalent of our pre-1919 stock. With that policy comes a sharp focus on the need for developing the product, the material, the detail, the science, the understanding of that building stock. Without that policy, that might have just been left to be done by the early adopters, the keen beans, the ones who own those buildings, those who have them, that they have to deal with them. And through that, you then get the development of training and understanding of materials, and I would like to mention Ecological Building Systems, who have been looking at that in Ireland as well, and at the training facilities that the policy has led to the development of in Ireland as well. So it's really useful to know that actually policy can change things overnight. They really can. So we need to have policy put in place.
You did mention EPCs, so I thought it would be also good just to talk a little bit about what we're doing in that space as well, because we really do think that EPCs are fundamental in trying to incentivise and enable the scale up of retrofit in a way that's really good quality. But actually, if you ask anyone in our industry, no one thinks that they work properly.
Flawed.
Yes, and
but they're the only thing we've got at the minute.
This is it.
So I suppose one of the main things is that all of our targets are based on the energy efficiency rating, which is not a measure of energy efficiency energy efficiency. It is a measure of energy cost. Even our net zero targets are based on that, even though it isn't a measure of carbon emissions. So there's definite work to do there in the metrics that it contain within EPCs. There's a real problem that health isn't incorporated into any of these metrics. There's more nuance needed in things like peak energy load, because that's going to be a real limiting factor when we're looking at decarbonisation. And also just let's use the carbon metric to set our carbon targets. That would make a lot of sense. There's a lot of calls to make them more accurate, which I think some of the work that's being done around HEM will help towards, but I think that there's also space there to do more, incorporating more real-world data. So we're looking at how that could be brought in along a pathway. The heritage sector also really have criticisms about the way that the recommendations work in EPCs. They don't think about repair and maintenance, which is absolutely fundamental to the way that your historic building performs. And then the finance sector use EPCs all the time, and they want them to be better, because if they're giving a lower interest rate for an EPC A or B property, at the minute that's basically incentivising people to own new build homes, because they're the ones that are achieving that. Never mind the performance.
Or irresponsible retrofit to be able to artificially get the EPCA.
Exactly.
Which is
And
a
there's
small sector of the market, I guess.
And really, shouldn't we be incentivising people to get their home to the best place that it could be maintaining health? What if we were able to say, well, the best that this home is going to get to if in a healthy way is a C, and if you get it there, then you are applicable for that lower interest rate. Finance industry also wants to be able to better measure their scope 3 emissions. If you've got a mortgage, your home's energy use is part of your mortgage provider's scope 3 emissions, and they've got huge targets to try and reduce them. So there's a lot of momentum there from different people who want different things.
Not least how they can, EPCs, if adjusted accordingly and appropriately, there's a huge resilience game that they have an impact to play.
And that engagement with, it's the first port of call that homeowners have, or anyone living in a home, to understand their energy use, to understand what might be able to be done. So I know that some people think, well, let's scrap them and do something else. We're absolutely on the page of let's try and make them as good as they can possibly be. And there are things we can do right now, and there's the ideal scenario we can get to. And we're working on sort of setting that in motion. So we've held a number of roundtables. We had 100 people come to the first one, and I was really surprised to understand that people wanted to talk in so much detail on EPCs. We've been collaborating with Bankers for Net Zero on that project. They've been convening the finance industry. And we see that as a real thing that could help solve a number of these different challenges.
And step one really was doing the literature review and understanding what everybody was saying, because I don't think everybody has the time to know what everybody else is saying, and everybody's so passionately driven about what they're saying about EPCs. Pulling that together and then turning that into an insights report that kind of says, these are the views.
So if you want to know what everyone's saying on EPCs, go on our website, because all the papers we're aware of are there. And also, hopefully, you'll get some emails saying, you've missed this one. And
so knowing the limitations, of course, with EPCs as they are right now, do you believe, and you're saying there is a policy void, obviously, for many of the retrofit side of things, but there is also very distinct policy which is utilising EPCs at the moment to make some choices, which, for example, on what's it called, the MES,
minimum energy efficiency standards,
for rental properties, which of course is driving people in a certain direction at the moment. So whilst there is a policy vacuum in certain areas, there is also defined policy which is possibly pushing in the wrong direction. So does that need to be controversial, maybe, but in your opinion, are we pushing policy in the wrong direction? Or
well, we're doing some work on incentivising retrofit in the private rental sector that's being funded by Impact on Urban Health,
whilst fundamentally considering protection of tenants' rights, which is a really important thing to say.
Yep.
In our minds, the idea that this government will increase or reduce, whichever way you want to put it, the EPC up to a C. We do support that generally because we do think, yes, a C is still going to perform better than an E in most cases if done well. However, one thing that we're really concerned about is how tenants are protected in that process. What we don't want to see is homes being improved and then their rent being put up, or homes being improved and then the tenants getting evicted, particularly as lots of the time that grants that are available for those types of homes are usually based on the tenant's own income. So what we don't want to see is a scenario where the tenant's income has been used to get a grant to do the works, the value of the home has gone up, and then the tenant's rent is an unstable position. But we also know that we've been doing some research on landlords more generally, and we've been doing some persona mapping, and we know that lots of landlords are not making very much money at all, and actually doing this works, even the void period might put them at a loss for that year. So they do need some sort of support in order to be able to upgrade their home. So we're thinking about what that looks like in terms of financial products, advice services and things like that, because fundamentally we want a scenario where tenants are able to win and landlords are able to have a positive outcome. So we're trying to sort of think about how we can balance those two sides of the coin and not make them two sides of a coin, help people sort of collaborate more openly.
On the home buying and selling side of it, I don't know if you're aware that there's the Home Buying and Selling Council. And of course, part of what we've been talking about, EPCs, feeds into that. Because the point, I'm sure you as architects will know that the point at which most people will do something to their home is when they first buy it. Because that's when they are incentivised, they've got the money, or usually have got some spare money to do it. They've allowed for it. So how are you feeding into that process as well at the moment?
I wouldn't say it's one of the things that we're focusing on specifically at the moment, but we know others that are. So we know people that are calling for stamp duty land tax to be linked to EPCs, and they're putting forward policy recommendations like that. But it isn't something that's falling within our work streams directly. Our engagement with the Home Buying and Selling Group has been to try and understand how they've been using or thinking of using digital building logbooks in the conveyancing world, because I think that that's a really interesting sort of tool that could be added to support retrofit as well. So we know that they've made some really interesting progress, and they're starting to being used on some of the new build schemes that the government are developing. So we're thinking, well, what could plug into those to enable you to store your retrofit assessment, enable you to store your retrofit plan, give you a funeral plan for your boiler, as it were. And so that when you do have your RMI builder come along to your home, they could look at your digital building logbook and say,
well, it makes such perfect sense, because I think it's something that I know.
Exactly.
I mean, I don't have a car, I live in London, on my bike, but still, if you have everybody understands that. You've got your logbook for your car, which talks about keeping it safe, keeping it roadworthy, reducing its emissions, and everybody just gets that. You wouldn't go in for your MOT, or I think it's called an NCT in Ireland, which is also, anyway, I digress. But it's understood. It's the same kind of process that we're trying to suggest here. Wouldn't it just help so much? And also all of the lost work that goes in every time a house is bought or sold and a survey is done. Like, how many times is that just something that's lost in a drawer somewhere? And actually what we need to be able to do to help understand better the existing stock we have is to get our hands on all of that information.
What if they had a part on them where you could, log your measurement of your real building, your real raw U value, and then the government could get access to that data in aggregate, and we could start to understand broader patterns.
The silly thing is, there are some sectors that have been doing this for years. I mean, churches, quinquennial inspections, for example, and bigger estates and so on and so forth. And for the last 30 years, in all my survey reports, I've been encouraging people to start logbooks. Do they? No.
I think it is emerging now, which is what's good. And I think actually looking to other sectors is also something that we find as an inspirational kind of way to consider things. What already resonates with people? What already is palatable? And how do we make it become just sort of like kind of a common sense approach?
And what is the pathway to incorporating them and EPCs as something that comes together so that they can speak to one another and eventually evolve into this?
Well, there are two things I wanted to pick up. Firstly, You mentioned earlier, you spoke about Ireland and things. It occurs to me that the sort of discussions and things you're doing in this country are happening elsewhere in the world. How much joined up thinking is there across the globe at different organisations? Because we often think, oh, we know best. We're doing it. We're the first to be doing this. We may not be, and we may not be the best. Yeah, well, exactly. And what? How are we learning? How are we speaking to other countries, other organisations across the globe?
I keep looking at you because I'm like, guess what? We have an answer for this too. And I don't mean like the answer, but I do think what's useful here is that we're obviously all asking similar questions. And again, I'm happily able to point to a very specific practical thing that's happening on the 7th of November. In partnership with, well, we're supporting the Built Environment Smarter Transformation for the International Retrofit Conference.
Gosh.
So we have Best Fest Summit that happens on the 6th of November, which is looking at everything around decarbonising the built environment. And then day 2 is the International Retrofit Conference. And at that, it's a situation where we're able to, this year we're taking a very action research focused approach. So showing what people are doing, what good looks like. Some of that strangely is actually UK-based projects that is showing real innovation in retrofit. But we're also going to be joined by ResCoop. So that's the organisation for, let me get this right, they don't quite call it community energy organisations, I think they call them civic energy organisations, but it's essentially groups in Europe who are doing interesting and innovative ways around business models for delivering this sort of stuff. So we will be hearing from colleagues like that. We're also, something else will be announced at that, which is about sort of co-learning and sharing across borders, which is something that we're trying to champion and see what could be within that remit of knowledge exchange and sharing that would have practical outputs and impacts for us all. Because obviously what is going to be different country to country is the political background and the financing of things, not least cultural and climatic differences, but there are things that we can learn from. That's one thing. And then there's our international models.
So we also want people to be able to have an awareness and a visual of where projects are happening and where there is good strategy being developed. So on our website we have a resource, international delivery models, where this is something that we're crowdsourcing and we're able to create through people that are part of our co-creators network.
If you're listening, you're doing great work, because there's a bunch of them that came to our the kickoff meeting last week who are keen to pull that together into this resource.
Open source showcasing of what's being done well across the whole of the country, so that policymakers can go on there and have a look and see if there's anything that...
And I would stress as well that this is not the first time anybody has asked this question. So I had a call with Richard Hanna at one of the research centres, UKirk. We'll have to come back to what that acronym stands for, but is an academic, and somebody put me in touch with them when we were saying, look, we're trying to pull together case studies on international delivery models, retrofit delivery models, and had this call with Richard, very generous in his knowledge sharing, but he was sort of saying, I wrote a paper on that 5 years ago. I'm like, oh God, we need to get a handle on this.
The Welsh Work Centre had also done some work on that.
So again, for us, it is doing this horizon scanning of what's already been done in this space, and then trying to either showcase the work that these organisations have put their blood, sweat and tears into, but trying to use, as we keep saying, the big obvious name of National Retrofit Hub to be the point at which you could come and find out a quick, sort of a accelerated pathway to that information. That's really what we're doing.
Because you don't want to reinvent the wheel where someone else has done the work.
We don't have time.
Can I make a personal plea and pick you up on something you said earlier? You used the date 1919. Can we scrap it?
We use the date 1919?
Well, pre-1919.
Everyone refers to pre-1919, and there are maybe reasons for that, but I in recent research I've been doing, basically we were still building solid wall structures right up until World War II. So the Irish thing, you said they used pre-1940. That's actually much more appropriate. And when you start looking at, because if we look at modern construction, let's assume that's cavity wall type things. Yes, there were some from the 20s, in fact from the 1870s and earlier, but really it wasn't until post-war that they became major. And then when we start looking at numbers, and this comes back to where it's important from our point of view with older buildings. If you start looking at 1940 as your figures, that's when you start realising that 25% of our built stock is of solid wall, older style buildings. It's not...
There were other issues with relying on age as well, in that most, like, age you would think is something that would be relatively accurately recorded on an EPC, but we know, I think Trustmark did some research and they found that in one street, the homes that were built basically at the same time, within a few years of each other, there was a 70-year age discrepancy between the oldest and the youngest recorded ones. So when we're thinking, we've been doing some work around what does best practice look like in terms of archetyping, and we've sort of suggested that it really depends on your use case. Who are you? What sort of stock are you looking at? Why are you doing this work? And we've sort of set out that, you know, there's a range of characteristics that you might archetype by. And yes, some people have archetyped by age because sometimes it's an easier way to do it. But we would probably more say you're only using age because you're making assumptions based on age. Yep. So maybe it's better to just archetype by wall type, for example. So I think, yeah, age is a tricky one for sure.
It is, but part of the problem is if we use a figure that says, oh, well, only 20% of our building stock is that old stuff, that, you know, 80% is fairly modern, so therefore it's going to be relatively easy to deal with. Actually, that's not true. It's actually we've got a much bigger percentage of an older building stock that actually requires this attention and should be the focus of what we're
those Victorian terraces are absolutely ubiquitous, aren't they? So I think
exactly.
Conscious of time, what I think would be really useful to hear is what you both are personally seeking to try and achieve from your involvement in the Retrofit Hub for the next couple of years ahead. Your personal gain, you know, your reason for sort of being involved and how you would like to see things moving.
So I think it's probably because of the rush of, like, a range of things that would want to see happen. I would like to see the conversation and the work around retrofit become less sideline and more commonplace, because I think ultimately we have to, coming back to what I mentioned earlier, we have to reckon with why any of us are doing this anyway and really kick hard against slipping into any kind of back to business as usual, right? So I ultimately want to see the construction industry, because that's where we're operating in and that's the place that we can have an impact. I would like to see us take full responsibility for our impact on the planet and not sort of be afraid of that. I would like us to feel what we're doing.
So cultural shift.
So I absolutely think that is a huge unlocker. If we can just allow ourselves to be vulnerable and to accept that it is a bit terrifying, but that we should try and work together to take full responsibility and to not be afraid by it, and to accept that it is going to be hard and messy and it's not going to look perfect, but we have to start taking full responsibility. So I think for me it is encouraging that greater understanding and not trying to, like, I feel like sometimes the industry just kind of wants to go, yeah, but we're not that bad. Like, we're not the aviation industry. I'm like, well, I mean, doesn't matter, let them sort that out, but you need to take full responsibility. So I think that's what I would like to see more of.
I think mine is, in the next 3 years or so, what I would really like us to have done is to really lay out and make clear the wide system impacts of the way that our homes perform, and to have engaged all of those parts of the system. So thinking about, yes, we know that the performance of our homes has a massive impact on health, but actually, are we really engaging with the health service? Are we really engaging with those organisations that are doing that work? Are we leveraging some of that savings that we can make? Really engaging with the DNOs and the people that are responsible for upgrading the grid. Really engaging with people that are looking at climate resilience and overheating. And I think our role is making that really clear, helping to enable others to quantify what that impact is, bringing those people together, because I think it's only by actually realising all the benefits are we actually really going to be able to fund all of this at scale as well.
Yeah, there's a beautiful diagram that Dark Matter Labs created, which had I think either underperforming housing at the centre, and then spun out from that all of the people who are picking up the bill off the back of that. And actually what we have said is you know, in
And that was
collaborate there.
localised in Birmingham.
It
wasn't
was, yeah. And it is incredible when you see the cost impact, not just the cost, and I'm not talking about money here, I'm talking about like the negative impacts of underperforming housing and what that has an impact on. And what we have said, they're collaborators with us, Dark Matter Labs, but we would love to flip that and show the picture of the potential for all of what we have historically called co-benefits.
So not the negative and the bad, but actually these are all the positives.
What
about
are we
you can
aiming
achieve.
for? What are we aiming for? Why are we doing this anyway? And like get away from like that, always starting at the barrier point and flipping it to like, what are we aspiring to achieve?
Yeah.
And
And
go
what
big.
society we are reimagining, and what does this society look like with all of these really good quality jobs and people fundamentally feeling like they've got purpose in the thing that they're doing
And let
for a
me tell
living.
you, it is so much more exciting, fun, kind of exhausting, but like wonderful to collaborate than to be in constant competition with. We ain't got time for that kind of crack either.
One of the things I'd love to explore, I'm conscious of time, we really haven't got time, but I'd love to talk more about the whole sustainability side of things, because one of my concerns is that people are trying to do these things, but not necessarily in the most sustainable manner. And I think that's something that...
I think given the timescale, the starting point for that conversation would be define sustainability. And then we can talk about it.
Yes.
Follow up. So just to wrap up then, how do people get involved in the hub, both from a sort of prospective homeowner that's interested in retrofit all the way through to the professional that wants to be involved? How do they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're working in the retrofit sector, if you've got any sort of interest in the retrofit sector, you can go on our website, you can subscribe to our newsletter. You can also join one of our 6 working groups. So you can do that through the website as well.
I think that we've got a great functioning website where we keep it, like we've got wonderful people who are supporting us and in the team who keep it up to date. So you'll know what we've been talking about most recently in the working group updates, and you can just join it.
I would also say that we are also looking for organisations that want to help inform what we do, support what we do. We're looking for more partners and sponsors who want to get more deeply involved, join our advisory panel.
Yeah, we probably should have said up top, we're a non-profit collaborative organisation, so it is all about trying to sustain the work. And I think everybody can agree that what we have managed to do collectively is like bring that together, and I don't think anybody wants to see this stop. So it's that, and we're always looking to collaborate on things and bring the value of leveraging the network who are engaging with us. That's the thing. This is the power of the network, the power of like cross-sectoral retrofit network.
Thank you both very much.
So, that was fascinating. What did you get from that?
I mean, clearly Rachel and Sarah have got a mountain to climb.
Yes.
With grappling with what is a pretty disparate, with many competing agendas from all sorts of different organisations, individuals, and it's fair play to them to sort of taking on the mantle and getting on with it. But I was personally very encouraged.
Yes.
By the methodology and how they're going through with it.
I think for me personally, I could have sat chatting for a lot longer because they're so fascinating to talk to. But there is so much that needs to be done. And particularly in the sector of heritage buildings, I mean, we touched upon there some of the science, the lack of information, etc., etc. But there is so much more to be done on that, I think. Well, we touched on the topic of what is sustainability, and that's something that could be explored further. But also just the repair and maintenance. I think we both know that if you just look after your buildings better, they perform better.
And I think part of almost the vernacular of calling this whole theory retrofit, I think almost potentially does it a bit of a disservice in that regard. Yeah. Because retrofit, quite often to make your building the most energy efficient it can be is, like you say, get it in good repair first. And that is one of the first things in PAS 2035 in terms of the process you need to go through and make an assessment of the maintenance side of things. Yeah. But there's no fitting at all required in some of these cases. And especially for our older building stock, quite frankly, by fitting things, you can cause more of an issue than not, other than having it in a good state of repair.
It's one of the things that I was talking to someone recently about this, because following on from the Windows conference that we had recently, where there was a lot of talk about we've lost the art of using Windows. And so we've gone down the route of double glazing, treble glazing, hermetically sealing buildings. And we then have a problem of moisture control. So what do? We put an extractor fan, humidity controlled, whatever. When it comes to rental buildings, you've then got tenants who are saying, I've got this electrical fan running all the time. I can't afford that. They then want to turn it off. That then throws the whole system into chaos, and they end up with mould. And that's not necessarily the fault of the tenant, but it's the fault of the system. So I think there is a need to rethink this heavy reliance on modern technology, and can we actually look at how windows ought to be used more appropriately in a way that means that we don't have to have so much energy being used to look after these buildings.
It's something that Germans, of course, do very well with their Lüften, and I'm sure you've come across that with regards to opening the windows for a period of time to air the building out, and that's. So yes, there's a technological sort of solution which we're often driven down, or at least are pushing down, but there's a huge educational piece there as well, which is a very big factor of what Rachel and Sarah were talking about in terms of education at all levels. And whilst they primarily are focusing on the deliverers and also the communities in terms of that education, it comes down to the homeowner in terms of understanding a little bit about how their building needs to function to then know, to keep my building healthy, this is what I've got to do. And it's almost got to start there. And I think we've lost that over the generations of being used to wearing shorts and T-shirt year round, for example.
But I think the other thing we didn't really talk about, but I think does need to be thought through, is the whole issue of cold calling. And these companies that phone up saying, there are these grants available and we can come and check your building, and it's leading up to them wanting to come and shove some product in your building, but there's no science behind it, there's no professional input. They might call their operative surveyors, but they're not usually trained in any way, or not in the way we'd expect them to be, and not the way we were not sufficiently trained. And I wonder if there's a work to be done there, but we didn't touch upon that, and it may not be the retrofit hub's role to deal with that. But I think that is something that, in terms of getting the message across to the public, stop accepting cold calls. Don't go with it, full stop.
But there's the cold call element, then there's also those that are seeking it out, because we'll leave aside the specifics of the Eco4 grant and how that operates, and there's another bit of information that in terms of internal wall insulation, and my feelings on that made very clear. But I think there is part of it which there is almost cart before the horse sometimes with regard to the policy vacuum that Rachel and Sarah mentioned. But then, of course, there is an element of, we can't do nothing from a policy perspective, so here's some money that we'll chuck towards doing something. And of course, with all policy, it's incredibly difficult, having done policy in the past in government, it's incredibly difficult to cover all nuances and be so specific in terms of doing it. And the problem is you then have the spin-offs where it goes to the wrong place, or it goes to the wrong type of products, or it goes to the wrong type of installers. And that's, I can't help but feel at the moment, where the policy that we have at the moment coming out from government to support homes that need this is not done and structured in such a way that it's actually for the benefit of the majority. And that's very difficult, because does that mean that we pause any policy and we pause any help until such point as the likes of the Retrofit Hub have done that collaboration, have got everyone thinking on the same page, and we're all driving towards the same thing? That could be many years from now. Or do we allow the kind of little bits of policy that might be helping some, but also have a detriment elsewhere? That's a very difficult one in terms of sequencing.
It is. No, that's been extremely interesting. And I think, I don't know about you, but I think I'd like to follow this up maybe in a year's time and see how they're getting on and see what's happening. I think there's so much more we can explore on this, but not for immediately.
No, indeed. And actually the outputs that they are currently working on producing was really encouraging. The sort of, the EPC reform, the sort of digital logbooks, those sort of things, which are things that are absolutely in the right direction for making a difference.
I think one of the things we should say is that with regard to this podcast, Where you find the podcast, we will be putting some links to things in the text and the accompanying description, show notes. But yeah, we'll make sure that there's information and links relevant to this podcast so that people listening, if they want to, they can look things up.
Well, we'll call that a wrap. See you folks next time.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Cheers.
You've been listening to Talking Conservation,
The podcast all about conservation of old, traditional and historic buildings and sites.
with me, Stephen Boniface.
And me, Rich Aylesbury.